What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Brand Builder TV, where we want to share with you how to brand and market in 2020, not 2004. And awesome episode. This is a follow-up guest that I reached out to when I saw the energy that he brings on stage. First of all, it's not easy to keep my attention. Ask my school teachers; they'll tell you. It was not easy, but the energy, the authenticity, the realness, with real practical steps on how he does it from stage, grabbed my attention, and that's why I reached out to him. Honestly, this is no BS. I really have seen a lot of people on stage, but never that kind of energy. So anyway, caught my attention, kept my attention. So definitely intrigued with what he offers. But we had him on a few months ago, and we decided after the show together that we want to bring him back on after this. Sounds like a pretty epic trip over in Africa. So Eric Edmeades, a true a master of the stage and communication, but so much more than that. So Eric, just introduce yourself and give us again that 30,000-foot view real quick, and then we'll jump into your trip to Africa.
You know, ultimately, I'm a fun seeker and an entrepreneur, and I'm curious, and so I've had a lot of fascinating background in business. I started my first business in my sort of mid-late 20s and in mobile computing, and sold it some years later, and just got into traveling around the world at that stage. And then after that, got involved in a number of other businesses, including Hollywood special effects, military simulation, medical simulation, and a variety of other things. And most recently, I've really begun to follow one of my real deepest passions, and that is evolutionary biology and psychology, and the impact of our evolution on our modern living and that sort of stuff. And as a consequence of that, I created my company WildFit, which really helps people close the evolution gap relative to food. And that's what dragged me off to Africa. That's how I ended up out there. Love
it. So let's just jump right in. You went out to Africa. What was the purpose? What was going on, and actually what happened?
Well, about 10 years ago, I used to run these leadership programs where I would take people up Kilimanjaro as part of a leadership development process. And one time, the logistics team that we were using, they Googled me or something and came up and said, "Hey, look, we think you'd be interested to go visit with some Bushmen," and I had seen the movie "The Gods Must Be Crazy" that you might be familiar with, and I had some experience of the African bush and stuff from having been born there and having family from there. So all of a sudden they're like, there's a chance for you to actually go meet some of these Bushmen. And I think it's important to define what that means. What they're talking about is there are a couple of pockets of people on the continent of Africa that still live a traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And so the Hadzabe people, or the Hadza people in the Lake Eyasi area of Tanzania, are one of those groups of people. And they offered me a chance to go visit them. So I've done that several times over the last 10 years. And so about 10 days ago, I got back from our latest trip, which was the longest one I've ever done. We went out for a week where I took a bunch of our certified coaches and clients with us, and about 12 of them, and went out to go visit them. And they got to do a bit of a cultural exchange and, see, and a little safari and that kind of stuff. Then I came back out of the bush for about a day to pick up two very good friends of mine, Vaughn and Ara, to go do an embedded stay, to go and live with the Bushmen for a week, to really immerse ourselves in their lifestyle. And I had done this before, but my friends Ara and Vaughn had not. And so I'd kind of challenged them to it. They'd accepted it, and off we went. And the whole trip was, everything conceivable went wrong. Everything was exactly right. It was a huge and tremendous adventure.
Wow. What was there before, during, and after? What did you actually witness? Because it was so much more your world than theirs. As the human beings, as the evolution in a week's time, that's another level, right? That what did you witness? What did you see?
We'd probably do about 8 episodes on what we
right.
Look from them and what we see. But one of the things that we really observe a lot from them is that they, they're not faced with all the distractions and choices that we're faced with. you know, at the end of the day, they are consistently responding to their environment. You know, they eat in response to their environment, they exercise in response to their environment, they sleep in response to their environment. So, you know, they're not sitting here going, oh, I don't know if I want that because I had it yesterday. You know, they just can't think like that. And so it's really fascinating to see these people that live their entire lives without the distraction of social media, without the, you know, choice of what to do when you grow up. Like they're, you know, like when you grow up, if you're a 12-year-old Bushman boy, what to do when you grow up is become a hunter. Because, you know, that's it. Like there, you know, there's no doctors, lawyers, astronauts. And so it's kind of interesting to see a sort of the energy of them when that's their life, when their life is literally like respond to the environment, do the best you can to survive and even thrive if you're lucky, and let's move forward. And so it does present some interesting psychological differences. Like, you know, I did a couple of hours of interviews with the chief and one of the women of the tribe, and again with the chief a bit later. And one of the things I asked the chief is, I said to him, you know, do you guys have long-term sadness? Depression is what I was really asking about. They just don't have a word for it, so it had to be translated, and it came. So basically, the question they ended up with is, do you have long-term sadness? Are people in their culture ever sad for an incredibly long period of time? And he's like, no. I mean, things can happen, and then you can be sad for a day or two, but then you got to get on with it. And I'm like, oh, dude should have a Dr. Phil show. Like he, you know, it's just like the way he answered it was just so straightforward.
But because because of where they're at and their circumstances, to me, this is my definition of what you just explained. That is the living in the now. That is leveraging the power that we're gifted with the now that we, right, don't see. Because we're looking here, we're looking there, like the internet, like what are we going to eat? Like I just had and you know, I'm embarrassed to say, right? I just had a ribeye last night. I don't want another ribeye, right? That's right. And I'm using that as an example, but that's the ultimate now. I love that, man. And to be able to live with them in that has to change you. And I'm really because you've been there and done it. I'm really interested in your two friends, man, because.
Well, let me tell you first of all, my follow-up question to him about this depression issue. I then said to him, like, you know, do you guys have suicide? And of course they don't have a word for that. So I had to explain that in our world, there are people who opt out. There are people who actually end their lives. I said, does anybody in the Hadza community ever do that? And he looks at me like I just asked him, you know, does anybody in the Hadza community, you know, eat rocks? Like it was just an insane notion to him. But the funniest part was there was another Bushman in the back of the cave, and he was sleeping on a skin. And when he heard the question translated into his language, or the statement that people in our world kill themselves, he sat up and belly laughed. Like he laughed like it was one of the funniest things he'd ever heard in his life. What? People do what? And then the chief, once the chief kind of processed this idea that people might actually kill themselves, his next question, which of course it's obvious, but his next question was, how? How did
like a little kid, so genuine.
Exactly. So I go, well, you know, some people use a gun, and he was horrified by that, like horrified. And then I go, and some people jump off really tall things, like they don't understand, you know, high rising, you know, but they understand falling out of trees and stuff. So like people jump off really high things, and he, again, horrified by that. And then I go, and some people use poison, and he went, okay, yeah, poison maybe I can understand, but the rest of it, no way. Wow.
Like it again, my thought process goes right to, wow, how much have we missed? Like how much and are we missing in this journey, right? Called life, whatever you want to put a title on. It's so interesting. Like I had a conversation with an associate yesterday about the internet and especially Instagram and that whole persona, right? And then make it so a double-edged sword, right? You get to see behind the black curtain of what we consider successful, but then then if you're not willing to step back and say, really, what is your definition of success? Like, what really is that? And man, I could tell you this, Eric, being on this earth 53 years, it really comes down to happiness. What else is there?
I'm so with you, Dave. Like when I first started getting involved in this idea that, maybe they didn't teach us everything we needed in school. When I started thinking about the other stuff, and I started discovering people like Jim Rohn and Tony Robbins and those guys. And, I published a magazine on the internet. It was the very first sort of personal development magazine ever. It was email based. I started publishing in 94, I think. Most people didn't have email in 94. But I wrote in one of those episodes that the only true measure of success in life is the number of days you're really happy. And I just wrote it there. And it was really funny is about 8 years later, I was going to China, and I was working with this tour operator, and they contacted me on Skype, and her Skype status was the only true measure of success in life is the number of days you're really happy. I'm like, where did you get that? And somebody had archived the old emails done, and she'd gotten it from there. And it just reminded me, I needed to hear my own words back to me at that point. And I really do think that's the case. Like, we are so caught up in, and I've really noticed this pattern in myself as I'm approaching 50 rapidly myself, is I've been noticing this pattern where it's like, well, I can be happy if I've achieved this, or I can be happy if that person's happy, or
conditional.
Boy, that's not conditional self-love, right?
No,
that isn't.
It right. So and then people wonder why am I not happy? Because they think it's the destination. And the old saying, it's the journey, not the destination. But it's so true, right? It's that what's real. It's really helped me. I have, and especially in the last year, I have a whole morning routine of 4 or 5 different meditations, and it's a 2-hour routine called the Monster Momentum Morning. But one of the things that really got me on track in the beginning, and it's been an evolution, right? And I'm still tweaking things and changing things that work for me. But one of the things that really got me dialed in, I call it the daily gift list, right? I think so many people are focusing on and reminding everyone at the end of the day about that flat tire versus that awesome customer service, right? Looking for the gifts instead of the negative. And it sounds so simple, but look, I also believe this, and I think you're on board with this. Life is simple, not always easy, but the simpler you make it, the easier it becomes. Look at those people.
One of the ways that I look at stuff like that is I think that a lot of our happiness can be determined about what we put parentheses around. And what I mean by that is that, okay, years ago, I was involved in purchasing a special effects studio in Northern California, originally part of Industrial Light and Magic, the original model shop where they made Empire Strikes Back and Indiana Jones and all this kind of stuff. So it's a very sexy situation. And it turned out that the guys that sold it to me, one in particular was a convicted, investment fraud guy. And, we'd been ripped off pretty badly. Now, if I put a parentheses around that, it was bad, right? It was bad. But and then I go over here and I go, yeah, but because I bought that studio, I got to work on Avatar, Pirates of the Caribbean, Transformers. I then, because of buying that studio, ended up starting another company that literally saved lives. It was, we were doing hyper-realistic trauma simulation dummies for the US Army. So if I put a parentheses around that, well, that's good. But what if I just kind of like grow up and put the parentheses around the entire circumstance? Then it's all good. That means that even those guys were good. Even though they were trying to rip us off, they're good. Even though they were willfully being, having criminal behavior with intent, at the end, if I drag the parentheses out wide enough, it's good. Because if I try to delete them, I have to delete that too. Exactly.
And here's the thing, though, Eric, if anybody in the audience is now saying to themselves on that practical mindset, well, wait a minute, Eric, they still ripped you off, or they still did this, they still did that. Here's my question to them, or my question to you to relay to them. When you look at it as the big parentheses instead of the 2 parentheses, how does that make you feel?
It resolves.
You won.
Yeah, it resolves. Like I have a very good friend who's not so good at moving parentheses, right? So what happened is that, you know, matter of fact, we had a circumstance where we worked with somebody and they, you know, they just, their ethics and ours didn't really align. It doesn't, you know, let's just say there was a values conflict, and it caused us quite a lot of pain. But same thing, it also brought a bunch of amazing things into our life and introduced incredible people to us. So if you drag the parentheses out, then what that means is when I meet that guy now, occasionally in public, I see him as a gift. Now, I don't believe in forgive and forget. I don't believe in that. I believe in forgive and remember. Yeah. So forgive is, hey, I have no animosity. I'm not angry with you. Yep. But I'm not necessarily going to go swimming with you. You know, right. Like I'm not necessarily getting in the water or doing business with you again. So it doesn't mean that I put the parentheses around it and then I have this like, everything's good. No. I look at it and go, that guy had a bad intent. Yes, lots of good stuff came from it. Maybe I've had those lessons. So forgive and remember. And here's a real important, let's put some neon signs around that, because here's another very important point that people have to understand is when you have the big parentheses and you do move on, now you're aligned in a different energy. So you won't even be aligned with that toxic energy anyway, right? I always say, let the universe do all the heavy lifting. Well, and you know, there's another version of that as well, which is once you, once you recognize that you're not sure where the parentheses closes, it means the minute something comes up that's less than ideal in the moment, you begin looking, I wonder when this closes. So immediately, and when you begin to realize it's going to close way out there, and then you got to ask yourself, how is it going to serve me before it closes? Because nothing that's ever happened in my life hasn't served me in some way. So it's gonna, and so, but then this is where the magic, I believe, this is where the magic happens, is all in your vibration at the moment of it happening. So the thing happens, and if you're a person with very small parenthetical, view of the world, then you look at this as a bad thing and you resist it. In fact, one of the things I always say is that disappointment is just a big F you to the universe. Basically, if you're disappointed, what you're saying is to the universe, I don't have faith in you that this is a good thing. But if you instead stop and you look at this and go, wow, this is unpleasant, but I know it's going to serve me, then you start asking, how is it going to serve me? What can I learn? And what are the opportunities that are going to come from this? Yes. And that in itself changes the whole destiny. It changes the whole legacy of that event. Oh, it's so true. The power of contrast, right? When you look at that power of contrast and now shift from a fear-based mentality, right, to a courageous mentality, because now you're embracing that. I love that, man. That, to me, that's what needs to be taught in school. That's the bulletproof self-image, right? That's a bulletproof of who you are. I want you to share your insight and what you took from your friends, though. Yeah, absolutely. These two guys they're two of my favorite people in the world. Vaughn runs a law firm here in Los Angeles, and he's a great man in every way. And Dr. Ara, you might know from the Golf Channel, he's a surgeon and just a fabulous man. And what happened was, I've been organizing these trips off to Africa, so they came on one of the light versions. The light version is we go on safari, we go see the lions and elephants and stuff, and then we go visit with the Bushmen and we see them for the night and do the day, and we go for a little nature walk with them, and they get and then we leave. The intense version is what I sometimes do, which is I go and stay embedded with them. So we're on the plane, leaving from the first trip, and I'm there with Ara, and he comes on the cabin. I've got my iPhone on, video rolling. I go, Ara, I've got a challenge for you. You think this was fun? Come back and live with them for a week with me. And he didn't miss a beat. On camera, he just said, yep, I'm in. And then we challenged Vaughn when we got back, same challenge, and boom, that's what got us there. And so, we got a film crew came in, we shot the whole thing in 4K. So we've made it into a little reality show of what it was like for the three of us to be there. Here were the rules. The rules were, we're there to live with them. We brought water because their relationship with water is interesting. And so we decided, we're not necessarily safe to drink some of the water sources they do. So we brought water, but we didn't bring food. And so, for example, when the two boys got there, the team actually went through their bags and it's like, where'd you get that beef jerky? That's no way, man. No. but then, you know, and then what was really crazy is the day that we went out to go get them, the night before that, I had started developing some really serious gut pains. And I just thought, you know, I'd eaten something off or what have you. But, you know, that night there was no sleeping. It was really terrible. And Ara is a surgeon, and another doctor friend of ours was on the trip, Dr. Vincent. He was on the first part of the trip. So here we are, the one day that we're out of the bush. Now, we're not in a city. We're still out in the middle of nowhere, but we're not deep in the bush. And both Vincent and Ara do abdominal exams on me, and they're both like, you know, that's appendicitis. And so all of a sudden, I've got to rush off to a tiny little hospital in the middle of nowhere for a CT scan. I mean, I'm amazed they even had a CT scan machine. And the surgeon, I'm so lucky, happened to be a retired American surgeon who was there doing volunteer time, and he'd done 1 million appendectomies. And so next thing you know, he's looking at the scan, and they're going, "We got to book the OR now." And so like an hour and a half later, I'm on the table. They offer me general or whatever, and boom, I'm like, I take a spinal so I can watch the procedure, which was fascinating, by the way. It's a weird thing to watch yourself get operated on. I don't recommend it to everybody. But anyway, the next morning, in the meantime, Ara and Vaughn have to head out into the bush because we're on a filming schedule. And so they head out into the bush without me, and I have to sleep in the hotel that night because when you have a spinal, you can't move your legs. And so the next morning, I'm like up and the doctor, the hospital, they're like, "What are you doing walking around?" I go, "I got to get out to the bush. I got to go now." They're like, you're like 8 hours post-op. What the hell are you doing? Boom, in the 4x4 off to the bush to be with the boys. I get there. They've had their bags searched for food and all this stuff, and the adventure begins. Now, remember, I had done this before, so I knew what we were getting into. I knew that hunts, you know, going hunting with these guys can mean 15, 20, 25 miles in a single day. You know, and don't imagine it's, you know, these LA people driving, talking, you know, like the toughest terrain, thorn trees that are actively attempting to eviscerate you, you know, like serious.
Yeah, the real, yeah.
And they didn't really have a sense of that. And so we got there, and of course now I've just had this happen. I can't go hunting with them. I can't run. I mean, I can barely walk at speed. The pain is so intense from the, you know, surgery and stuff. So they have to go out and do these hunts. And Dave, it was hard. Like the hunts weren't so successful because, again, you know, there are a lot of reasons, you know, but one of them being is they're city boys. So they're not, it's tougher for the Bushmen to hunt when they've got one of us along because we're not as bush friendly. And so they're going out on these major hunts and they're not getting food. And I think it got to be about the third day with literally no food, doing 10, 15, 20 miles. I think on the peak day, they did a 20, 21 mile hunt.
Wow.
And,
what's the weather like? Is it really hot? Is it humid?
It's hot. I mean, we're there at a cooler time of the year, but it's certainly, so I can't do Fahrenheit so well, but I'm going to say it's in the 90s. Like
okay.
It's definitely hot. You know, you're wearing a t-shirt and you're putting on sunblock and it's hot.
Yeah.
So, so it was really interesting to be like lying around the fire at night, talking about, you know, what it's really like to face the reality that you didn't eat today and you got to go and do 10 miles tomorrow or more or 20 miles tomorrow to go and try and get food. You know, that you don't just have Uber Eats at your fingertip, that you can't just pop into the Whole Foods, you know, that it really is fascinating to live at the edge like that.
Eric, what was their energy, the Bushmen? Because did you feel like they felt like towards the third day, like, okay, these guys might be anchors now. Like we need to, did you feel any sense of urgency, or what was that energy from them?
No, you know, there are a couple things to consider. The one is that they do dry meat and stuff. So okay. So we found out later that at night they actually, because they had meat from before, they actually had a small amount of food to kind of tide them over. Plus, they're killing small things on the hunts, like small birds and unfortunately even small monkeys sometimes. Very small things. So they're getting like small doses on the way. And I think that while they did offer Ara and Vaughn, like, here, would you like this little bird's head? The guys weren't down for that. So,
not yet.
Yeah, exactly. Not yet. Another few days. In fact, the truth is that's what ended up happening was, you know, after, I think it was on the second or third day, and I couldn't eat. I mean, I'm like, I've just had abdominal surgery and my digestive system isn't, you know, and I'm like, anyway, so at one point they got this bird and we didn't, we're sitting there talking with them, and they're just like ripping the feathers out of this bird. And then all of a sudden they grab this little pot and they throw the pot on the fire, and then they cut the bird open and and they throw the bits of the bird into the next thing you know, and you know, this is terrible, but the bird is a hornbill, which is like Zazu from The Lion King. And I don't know if you remember The Lion King, but they talked about the little birdie boiler. Well, this was literally the little birdie boiler. So they threw the little bird in there, and I'm telling you, that was like it was basically hornbill broth soup. And it was my first food after the operation. And it was, I can only tell you, delicious.
Wow.
I mean, it was really amazing. So we weren't completely absent any nourishment, but we were certainly at calorie deficit every day. And they run calorie deficits most days, and then they have calorie peak days. And I think that's been really fascinating to observe, because one of the things we talk a lot about at WildFit is that you're really not eating. When you eat today, you're really not eating for today. You know, when you're eating, you're actually eating energy for next week. Now, most people in the Western world are eating fast burning sugar. So their food does affect their energy today, but it's not meant to. You're meant to be eating for the future. You're eating nutritionally for the future. When you eat B12, it stays in your system for weeks or months. So you're not really meant to be dependent upon meals on a day-by-day basis. That's why intermittent fasting works so well. And so it was interesting to recognize that we actually asked the Bushmen, do they ever intentionally fast? Again, no. Like right. It was basically, he's like, if he could speak English, he would have said this. He goes, do you mean that there are people in your world that intentionally don't eat when like that's it. That's an alien notion to them, because of course food requires so much work that they would never not eat, but they are forced into fasting by circumstance on a regular basis. And so they don't get panicky when they haven't eaten for a day or two, because that's normal.
And it also, and I know I'm speaking to the masses here because this is your wheelhouse, but it also, and so I love and so fascinated with the human body and what it can really adapt to. And it really shows us, right, that, and you know this better than anybody, how much we overeat, we just overcompensate, right? And then try and figure out why is my digestive system having problems? Because I've been doing intermittent fasting for, again, close to a year now, and now I'm switching over the keto and carnivore and going back and forth on that. But man, the intermittent fasting has been a game changer for me on so many levels.
And remember, it's funny, we don't in our coaching programs in WildFit, we actually don't teach intermittent fasting. And there's a reason for that. And that is that our programs are built for self-esteem development. So the trouble is, the more rules you give people, the more rules they break, and then the more their self-esteem is damaged, and then they fall off the diet. That's why we've polled our clients at 2 weeks into our program. We polled our clients, how many of you right now, this is the longest you've ever stuck with any diet? And it's 80% of them.
Wow.
80% of those people have never lasted 2 weeks on a diet, right? And in our program, we have an 85% completion rate on a 3-month dietary reform program. So, you know, we don't include intermittent fasting directly in the program, because it's just one more thing for people to have to use willpower for. And willpower is a tough thing when it comes to food. That said, we're all for it. And once people have gone through our initial coaching program, we'll then introduce them to both long-term fasting and intermittent fasting. Because guess what? Nature imposed that on us, you know, and our digestive system is not only okay with it, but it's actually requiring it from time to time. I mean, look, if you've got a factory and you want to do some refurb work, you got to shut the factory down. So if you want to go in and do some good repair of the stomach lining and get the, you know, cleansing out of the colon and all that kind of stuff, well, you're going to have to stop putting stuff in for a little while. And so intermittent fasting and long-term fasting is important. There's no question about it.
I love that. So I want to be respectful of your time, but I have to know, what did your two friends say after this experience?
You know, I think they would both, you know, maybe what I'll do is hook you up with them, and maybe you could get an episode.
Would love it.
They're really solid guys. And I think, you know, Vaughn reached a bit of a breaking point, not a toughness. I was blown away. Both of them did not break a toughness breaking point. They really handled it. You know, you got to know, I went out with the Bushmen the first time I did a week-long stay. I did 27 miles on the first day and 17 miles on the second day. Most people train for marathons and take days off afterward. I didn't train for the 27 miles and immediately had to do 17. Now, these guys, I don't think ever did any 2 days quite as intense as that, but I think they did like 20 and 15, which, you know, which they didn't train for. Now, they're both in good shape, but they handled the toughness aspect of it, no question. Vaughn reached a bit of a breaking point around the killing, like watching them kill birds, and like it's a different world, right? They'll kill the bird, they'll shoot the bird. The bird's not dead. They shoot it with a bow, and then they grab the bird and just kind of break its neck and then stick it into their belt, but it's not dead. And so, I suspect that the reason they don't kill the thing right away is because it stays fresh longer that way.
Oh.
So it seems pretty like inhumane, obviously. I always find that word fascinating, because humane is a version of human, and what I've seen humans do is hardly humane. So, but
right.
in any event, and one day I think Vaughn really reached a bit of a breaking point, because they killed a small monkey in front of him, and he's like, I can't. So on the final day, he opted out of the hunt, which was the day that I finally could join the hunt again after the surgery. But I know that he, from a cultural perspective, it was mind blowing for him. He really connected well with the tribe, and just it was mind blowing. And Ara had also been out with him before, and he's a surgeon and a sports doctor. He works with some of the top ranked golfers and tennis players in the world. And so he's really interested in physiology. And so one of the things he really was taken away from that is their musculature and their posture.
Yeah.
They're smaller than we are.
Yes.
Genetically, their genetic height potential is a lot lower than ours, because we have, I doubt they have very much Neanderthal DNA, right? They're Bushmen.
Mm-hmm.
But what he was taking a look at was, like, we were looking at when they draw back their bows, what the musculature.
Yes.
Like. These guys have never been to a gym in their life, and they got it going on.
Yes.
And so Ara was really fascinated by that, and I think really was inspired a lot by that. So the boys had a great time. I'll definitely, if you reach out to see on my team, I can get you connected with them. I bet they'd both be great guests.
Would love that. And it's so interesting, because I can sit and watch. I actually have video on my phone. I can sit and watch silverback gorillas for hours because of that same thing, right? They're eating grass, and they look like they just walked out of a powerlifting gym. They have traps. It just is so intriguing to me to watch them, and I can literally watch them for hours, man. Oh man, what an awesome trip, dude.
One thing, like, look, sometimes people, I see people write about me, and they like, oh, Eric goes to visit the Bushmen, and he like glorifies that's the way to live or something, and that's not at all what we're doing. My view is that, let me put it this way. When they first put elephants in zoos and circuses, elephants would only live 7 or 8 years, and nobody knew that was wrong. They just, big animals don't live a long time, in their thinking back in the 1800s. Little dogs live 15 years, big dogs live 8.
Yep.
So in any event, at some point after they started putting elephants in zoos and circuses, they began to recognize that elephants in nature would live to 70 or more. And so, of course, all the zoo and circus owners became fascinated with how they could get their captive elephants to live that, but they just couldn't do it. So they started studying what the differences were. And I read this article many years ago, and it was actually the catalyst for even creating our WildFit company. And the article talked about the elephant's wild diet and the elephant's captive diet. And that kind of irritated me, because wild diet is grammatically incorrect. The elephants don't have a wild diet. The elephants have an elephant diet. And as I had that thought, I was on a plane reading this in an in-flight magazine. And as I had that thought, I was like, wait a second now. Every animal on earth, every species on earth, every organism on earth has a diet, a naturally evolved lifestyle. And when it's on that lifestyle, it lives an optimal existence. And when it's off that lifestyle, it has disease and injury and what have you. And so what they began doing is taking what they learned from the elephant's naturally evolved diet. Elephants eat 200 kilograms of grass and bark every day, and fresh seasonal fruits, and they drink 70 liters of water, and they walk certain distances. And when they took that and brought it into the captive environment, all of a sudden captive elephants not only got to their 70, but very often outlived elephants in the wild. Why?
Wow.
Because the zoo is a safer environment. So if you take the optimal physical experience and attach it to the safer physical environment, you optimize the life extension, the longevity of that organism. Well, hold on. We can do the same thing. We know enough about human history at this point to close the physical evolution gap, where we can take a look and go, we know we need to move a certain amount. We know what we used to eat. We know what we need nutritionally. We know what we need for sleep. Like we can duplicate our naturally evolved, quote, wild diet, as Abel James would call it. Like we can take that naturally evolved lifestyle and bring it into our unbelievably safe world and extend our lives dramatically. And that's really what these adventures have been about, what that research has been about.
Man, I love it. And look, at the end of the day, to me, it doesn't matter what anybody thinks, whether it's right or wrong. At the end of the day, it's your journey, right? It's what works for you. And God, man, the experiences, you hit what I call life's trifecta with just one journey, just one time over there. It's live experiences, create memories, and leave legacies, man. And if you could hit those three pillars on a consistent basis, to me, you won. And I love it, man. And I do. I love that. I love that experience, and I love that you were able to ask them those questions, and that little kid response, like, kill yourself. What? Like, it's not even in my realm. And so
I would like it like this: live the present in such a way that the future you will have a fantastic life and enjoy your past.
I love it, man. I love it. To me, and just when you said that, the energy, right? The smile, right? The energy. And that's what I always say. If anybody questions what you're doing, just simply ask me, how do I feel? And if I'm telling you that I'm happy, that's all that matters. It's so simple, this whole journey that we're on, man.
We shot all the interviews we did with the Bushmen, and we'll actually, there's a couple different things we did. We shot this as a reality show, so we're now currently shopping that to kind of get that out into the world. But the interviews we shot separately, and we'll be bleeding those out through my Instagram account. We'll make sure that you know about it, because I'll you some of the Q&A will be fascinating to you. So come. We'll give you a heads up when we're ready to release. Yeah,
just attach me on it, and I'll also blast it out, man, because I'm so interested. You know who's coming on my show is a nonprofit called Vet Paws over in Africa. What they do is that they go after the poachers, like the ones that are doing illegally killing the rhinos and that. And I have a good friend who is the founder of Warfighter Made. And he has some recon guys that kind of headed out over there. So matter of fact,
That's going to be super interesting. About 23 years ago, I was offered a chance. I was doing some photojournalism type stuff back then, and I was offered a chance to go and do an embedded stay with an anti-poaching team.
Wow.
In South Africa. And I'd been given all the warnings, like, you need to understand that, like, poachers, there's two types of poachers. There's the hand-to-mouth poachers that are using, snares and shit, trying to kill little things. But the guys that are out there for the elephants and the rhinos, they use AK-47s. And they said, you need to know, like, if you spend 2 weeks with us, the odds are at some point during that time, there could be a firefight. And I'm like, I'm 20, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, cool. And then my wife got pregnant. And I'm like, no, I'm not going. I'm not going.
That's it. I mean,
I read something so cool the other day, and I haven't had a chance to go vet whether it was totally true, but a few of my friends said that it is. There's a company who's figured out a way to 3D print rhino horns that have the genetic signature of rhino horns.
Oh, wow.
So they can flood the market with fake rhino horns, so that now those idiots that are thinking rhino horn is somehow going to replace, like, we all thought Viagra was going to save the rhino. We really, these dumbass idiots, mostly, unfortunately, Vietnam, Taiwan, China, they have this idea that the rhino horn is going to give them wood. Like, it's insane. But now this company's got this way of flooding the market with fake rhino horns that are indeterminate. They can't tell the difference between them. And that's, like, if that's true, I'm excited. And then also another woman that you want to take a look at getting on your show after your anti-poaching episode is a woman named Lorinda Hearn, I should say. Horn. I got rhino horns on the mind.
Hearn?
Lorinda, amazing woman. I wrote a fiction book some years ago about an idea about how to save the rhinos, and I never published it. And then one day, a friend of mine, Bruce, introduced me to her, and she did it. They figured out a way to embed poison into the horns. They dart the rhino, put poison in the horns, and then tell everybody, look, our horns are poisonous, so don't kill our rhinos because you can't make tea from it. And I'll bet you that she'd be a great guest for you to have again. Ask Kelsey, we can get you connected.
Oh man, I would love that. So it didn't affect the rhinos.
No, it doesn't. Well, horns, here's the joke. It's just fingernail.
Yeah.
It's just hair. So it doesn't feed back into the bloodstream. So but ask her all the tough science. She'll help you out. And you got to ask her what inspired her. I won't give away the story. I'll just say she went through, the kind of heartbreak only a Disney movie can give you. And it inspired her to want to make real change in the world and put a real dent in conservation. And she's done it. So you definitely want to.
I'll follow up with your assistant and I'll get all that connected. And my man, I know you have a lot of balls in the air. Somewhere down the road, I want to definitely have you back on and really talk about what you're doing with your company, man, with the lifestyle changes. Because at the end of the day, that's really what it sounds like you're doing. It's that lifestyle change, not the diet, right? Not that short term.
Dave, you're saying it right. Like what we've done that is disruptive and different than the diet industry on the whole. There are some incredible giants out there doing incredible work around nutrition. The fact is that nutritional information doesn't actually change a damn thing. I know it does. I know that if we can change government regulations and we can change food regulations and stuff, that'll help. But the fact is people ultimately vote with their pocketbooks. They vote with their wallets. And most people don't recognize how deeply manipulated they've been by the food industry. And they don't realize how many of their food decisions are unconscious. Right. So what we've done that's so different than that is we've actually figured out the behavioral change science behind food. And so when people come, like, I heard you talking about the carnivore diet. I think the carnivore diet's a really interesting experiment. And I think that there's a lot of good science behind it. All I will tell you is I don't really care a lot about studies relative to food because food science is incredibly complicated and it's very hard to run any kind of study where you only change the one variable and you never study it long enough. Nobody's done carnivore diet their whole life for us to measure what that's like. Mm-hmm. My ultimate test when it comes to nutrition is, yes, I'll look at the study, I'll see what it might suggest, but then I will run it through evolutionary common sense. And here's what I know from an evolutionary common sense perspective. Our ancestors ate plants. Now, they didn't eat South American plants, but they ate plants. And so I would say to you that, maybe do the Joe Rogan thing where you do carnivore as a season, which is something we teach, is like a seasonal rotation of your nutrition. But I'm not all with these guys that are like, yeah, I'm just going to eat meat only for the rest of my life. To me, that's not so different than I'm just never going to eat meat for the rest of my life. Yeah. Neither one of those answers are correct to me. I will definitely come back and have a chat about that.
No, let's do that and let's give it the real, what it deserves, right? Let's do a real episode on this because there's so much that you could bring to the table that at the very least, it's going to be like, okay, let me think about that, right? I love that, man. And I just love what you're doing, brother. I love your energy.
Thank you.
I knew that from when I saw you on stage, man, on YouTube, man. It came across the lines, man. I love it. I said I got to connect with this guy. So, and we talked about the downside real quick of social media, but the beautiful side is we can do this, right?
You know what? My rule is real simple. My rules are real simple. If you are using social media, it is one of the most powerful tools available. If it's using you, you're in deep trouble.
Yes.
And that's the way I look at it. And Instagram, like everybody's like, oh, comparison is terrible. No, I don't think comparison is terrible at all. Comparison can drive us, but as long as we're honest about that comparison. And so if somebody's looking on their Instagram feed and experiencing jealousy, that's their problem.
Yes.
They could be looking at, if one of your friends uploads a picture of them standing in front of a Lamborghini, first of all, they're probably faking it. But even if they're not, my God, you should be like excited for them. And the weirdest thing is if you look at Instagram from the perspective of inspiration rather than like negative comparison, I think it's fabulous. So I'm with you. Social media, if you're using it, most powerful thing available these days for reach. If it's using you, you're on a downward spiral.
That's it, right? It's the ultimate leverage.
Yeah.
And that's what entrepreneurs, that's who we are. We're the ultimate leverage machines. We're searching for leverage.
It's funny. I met a guy this week that I'd heard a lot about. He's a really good guy. He teaches entrepreneurship and he's just super sharp, really good business builder. But he just was going on about how about 6 months ago, he decided to completely come off social media. And I did that experiment. I'm not completely off social media, but I gave up my cell phone for 6.5 months. I lived 6.5 months with no phone. I just decided to try to completely unplug that way. So I had access to stuff on my laptop when I was at a desk, but that was it. But I'll tell you, you know, my view of social media is that if you have an important message to get in the world, saying no to social media is like saying no to television in the 70s and 80s. Like, you know, you mentioned you saw me on YouTube. By the way, I don't think we've ever really pushed any content on YouTube. My publisher did that. And YouTube has changed my life. The number of people that I get to reach today, the number of people that I get to help today because of social media, again, if you're using it, it's like so many things. If you're using it, it's incredibly powerful. Just don't let Mark Zuckerberg use you.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's that simple. Man, I want to thank you for taking the time, and I mean it. Let's get you back on somewhere down the road, and we'll connect, and then really dive into what you're doing and some of those testimonials and the transitions, because I love the whole fact of, we both look at it this way. It's got to be a lifestyle changer. It's only short term. So thank you so much for watching this episode. Please feel free to share it. There's going to be so many golden nuggets coming out of this. And our first episode, we're just chopping that up too, that we're on. But my man, you got carte blanche here. I love it. I love it. So thank you for taking the time. And as always, guys, share this episode, jump on our YouTube and share it out there. Thanks, guys.